Good morning and welcome to Veterans Heartbeat on the Pulse of the Veteran, where we discuss issues of health, happiness, opportunity, and well-being of interest to the veteran community, their families, and the community who honors them.
Good morning and welcome to another episode of Veterans Heartbeat, brought to you by River, the Rural Institute for Veterans Education and Research. My name is Jason Zentcraft. My co-host Ed Lasovsky is here with me, and he is the president of River. We welcome you to a weekly wide-ranging discussion of issues, events, opportunities, and needs in our veteran community. Morning, Ed. How you doing?
Morning, Jason.
We would also like to thank our sponsor, Farside Signs. They create amazing-looking vehicle graphics that will drive traffic to your business. Farside Signs make unique designs that are specific to your business, and they are located at 1526 South Avenue West in Missoula. Follow them on the web, Instagram, and Facebook, or stop on by. As stated before, we're also sponsored by River, who offer many services to veterans, such as weekly free vestibular disorder testing clinic and educational programs that focus on veterans helping veterans.
This morning we've got Fez, our Vice President of Education. He's wanting to fill you guys in on what we've been doing at the River Academy.
Yes, we've been having a lot of fun out at River, developing a new catalog and having the catalog expanded, so then it includes a lot more vocational education. So for those of you that might be interested, just give us a call and let us know what we can do for you.
You know, this morning we're real lucky. We're going to have the VA Montana Suicide Prevention Coordinator on with us. But before we bring her on, we've been doing a lot of work there at River, and we've been having a lot of fun with the families. Can you describe some of the events that's been going on the last couple?
2 weeks ago, we were up at Emerald Lake, where we have some property, and we did some archery of our students and their families. Last week, we did a bike ride down the Bitterroot Trail, and this week we're planning a local scavenger hunt. So there's lots of things happening. We're always supporting the families of our veterans and supporting their children especially. We want to get as many people involved.
Well, for our listeners, if you're out there and you want to do some of these RT events, these recreational therapy events, just give us a call at River.
Absolutely. The more people, the merrier. There's no cost to you guys. As long as we know you're coming, you know, we can make arrangements for just about anybody. Just give us a call and we'll get you in.
We have Juliana Hallows, LCPC, who is the VA Montana Suicide Prevention Coordinator, and we're real excited to have her on this morning. Good morning, Juliana. How are you doing this morning?
Fine, thank you. I'm excited to be here and share some information.
Well, we had a suicide prevention, or a suicide report that just got released, stating that Montana was number one in the suicide realm within the veterans population. But I've got a lot of questions about that study. One of the questions was that it only brings it up to 2014. And I know that you guys have been working real hard over in Helena to try and prevent suicide, and I know you've got action plans, so we want to hear about those.
Yeah, I think this is actually a pretty amazing moment. We've had CDC data on veteran suicide for the nation for many years. And the VA led one of the largest studies regarding suicide, gathering data from 2001 clear through 2014, which is a large, significant amount of data that they were able to analyze. And we were finally able to get veteran-specific data per state. Now, being first in suicide in Montana isn't news to Montanans. We've been first for suicide as a state or in the top 5 for the past 4 decades. And so veterans ranking number 1 for suicide is consistent with our state ranking number 1 or in the top 5 over those decades, simply because there's factors that contribute to suicide in Montana. So while I'm sad to hear that number, and I'm disappointed that our state has this notoriety related to this, I'm excited to work with our veterans and work with our state suicide prevention coordinator and many organizations and communities in tackling this issue.
Yeah, it's. I'm looking at a graph right out of that, and one of the things that was startling to me was veterans that are in care with the VA the rates of suicide are even almost lower than the rates for civilian population, whereas those that are not getting care with the VHA or Veterans Health Administration, it's off the charts, is it not?
It is. And so what we've actually found over time is that the report, when it's talking about veterans that have died by suicide, it's anyone who's been a service member, not just veterans who are eligible or enrolled in VA care. But what we do know is that the veterans that are enrolled in VA care, the growth rate of suicide is about 8.8% nationally. But the growth rate of suicide among veterans who are not in VA care is roughly 38%, which is 30% more. So what we do know is that when someone's struggling and when they're thinking of suicide, if they get help, they can be saved. And that's the biggest message there, is our veterans who aren't enrolled in care or aren't engaged in care, we need to find them, and we need to get them connected, whether it's at the VA or whether it's at their community clinic. They need to know they're not alone and that there's help out there and that that help is effective.
You know, I was talking earlier on one of the shows with Mike Garcia. He said there's like 28,000 eligible veterans for care that are not enrolled in the VA. Yeah.
26,000.
Oh, it's
yes.
26,000.
In the state of Montana. So we really need to reach out to those individuals, and we've got several plans in place to find them.
All right, a couple questions that I've got here. 2014 report. That's the current stats. It's 2017.
Mm-hmm.
You've done a lot of work, I'm sure, between 2014 and 2017. Can you tell me some of the work you've been doing?
Yes. As you know, in 2015, the suicide prevention coordinator position was vacant at the VA, and I came on board in January of 2016. And at that time, I took it upon myself, and the Montana VA took it upon themselves to directly target our suicide prevention, even before we had the data for 2014. And so we did several things. We updated all of our policies and programmatic expectations across the board. We brought on a very robust suicide risk assessment, trained all of our clinicians and provider on it. We began a universal suicide risk screening in the ER for anyone that comes in. It's the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale. We started a mail program for our veterans. So when we have a veteran who's high risk for suicide, we know who they are. We make sure that they get into counseling, and then we send them caring communications. I call them, my counterpart calls them, and we make sure that they know that they're cared for. And those letters continue for a year beyond when they've been identified as high risk for suicide. We've also implemented something called Reach Vet, which is for those veterans that maybe they haven't said I'm suicidal, but this algorithm can go through their records and mark the things that put them at risk. So if they've had hospital stays and substance use issues and recent death and increased use of mental health, whatever those are, those algorithms go through that, and it'll tell us, hey, you might want to call this veteran because they may be at risk for suicide. And so even our veterans who aren't saying help me, we're able to find and connect with them. And an example of this is with that Reach Vet program is I'd identified a veteran, and I couldn't find him, and I called and finally found this veteran. And through a conversation, he told me he was homeless and hadn't been to his primary care or the VA in a long while and needed help. And we were able to secure housing for him, get him reconnected to the VA, to services and medical care that he really needed. And so that's an example where that Reach Vet program is helping our veterans that aren't necessarily asking for help but need it. So there are several things that we've done there. We've bolstered our staffing, and we continue to hire in mental health. We have an excellent telehealth program that is at all 15 sites. So a lot of my veterans can see someone face-to-face for counseling at 8 sites, but we know that our rural veterans must embrace telehealth, and it provides the same quality of care just through a different modality, and it's closer. It's at all 15 sites versus the 8 sites. So we've been working pretty hard. I also can't take the credit for what's been happening for our veterans because we have so many community partners that have been doing so much for our veterans. Our state suicide prevention coordinator has worked on an ad campaign to outreach to our veterans that's outstanding. Our mental health centers have agreed and worked with our veterans in mental health when we couldn't find them. Our emergency care facilities across the state are working with our veterans and supporting them. Really, in Montana, suicide is everyone's business, and it really takes everybody to work together and say, hey, I need help, or hey, I'm going to be there for you and help you. And so that's pretty critical as well.
Now, one of the things that I read in this report was on the Native Americans. Do you have any stats on them from Montana?
So, yes, our state in 2013 developed a legislation called the Montana Mortality Suicide Review Team. And from 2014 through 2016, they gathered data about suicides in Montana, specific to our American Indians, our veterans, our youth, and our adult populations. And then they broke that data out and came out with an excellent report. And you can visit the state DPHHS site for suicide prevention and read that data and report. And it will give you Montana-specific information about our American Indian population. Now, in our suicide prevention office, one thing that we hope to do in the future is strengthen our partnerships with our American Indian tribes. And I've been able to work with one tribe, and I'm currently working with our VA American Indian liaison to see what we can do, because a lot of our tribes are working hard and have some really good things in place already, and I just want to support their efforts, whatever that can look like. And so it's a matter of getting connected and contacting them, and we're at the beginning phases of that intervention where we're identifying people that we can contact and offer our supports.
You know, we focus a lot on veterans, but we have no data on the families, because suicide does affect families. Mm-hmm. And what is the statistic? 3 to 6 times greater chance of completion after being a survivor?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. At Montana VA, we actually have instituted what's called a post-vention process. So anytime we do suffer a loss of a veteran that's died by suicide, I directly contact the family. I send them a packet about information for funeral reimbursement, a caring card. I talk with them. With some of my veteran families, I'll call several times to check in on them. We actually have a contract with our transitional, it's actually called TAPS is the program, that family members who've lost veterans to suicide can work with TAPS to have groups and counseling and outreach and support. And they can go to our vet centers and have counseling as well. So we definitely want to take care of our veterans' families who are suffering the most at that time. Also, I'm working with the Montana chapter for the American Suicide Prevention Foundation on a Survivor Loss Day on November 18th. We're hoping to have a program for those who have suffered the loss of suicide or they themselves have survived suicide to come and grieve together and remember those we've lost, and also focus on resiliency and the things we can do to survive. Because you are right, when someone dies by suicide, 6 to 40 people are directly impacted by that death. And they become at risk for suicide as well. And one of the biggest things in preventing suicide is hope, knowing that you belong, and getting care when you need it.
You bring up a really good point. In our work that we do at the Institute, I don't think we know of a veteran yet that's come through the Institute that doesn't know another veteran that is completed. And I think that is adding to the problem.
Yeah, definitely. Because they see someone and they know the loss that they've been through. And then sometimes individuals think maybe I should do the same. But what's important to know is that people can make a permanent decision based on a temporary experience. And studies have shown that most attempts are impulsive. I know a lot of people like to think that suicides are well planned and thought out and held over time, but what's consistently been shown is that those that have actually attempted by lethal means most often did within the hour of that initial thought. And so if we can help someone slow down that impulse and remember why they matter and why they matter to others, we can help save a life. And so it is an issue because we do have so many veterans that we've lost by suicide that we've got to tell our veterans, let's help you, let's keep you here because you do matter. You matter to your battle buddy, you matter to other veterans, and you matter to us. And so that's part of our safety planning as well that we have, and in our risk assessment we ask that, what are your reasons for living? And we really try to help our veterans focus on wellness and how they can live.
Okay. Now, we've talked a lot about mental health.
Mm-hmm.
But according to the data that I've read, 40 to 50% are completed suicides are the result of either chronic pain or some chronic condition. Do you care to comment on that?
I can't specifically speak to those numbers, but what I can say is that chronic pain is correlated with suicidal thoughts and self-directed violence. But in regards to the actual numbers, I do not have the study in front of me. But it does make sense when you're living with chronic pain that you're trying to think of a way out, and some individuals think of suicide. And so we do see that. And we do know that a lot of our individuals that die by suicide often have a mental illness or a mental health issue, and in some cases they have chronic pain. But what's good about the chronic pain, although there's nothing good about chronic pain, is that there are ways for it to be treated, just as there are ways for depression to be treated. And I have an example of a veteran living with chronic pain and was really feeling done with life, and I just said, come in, let's have a conversation. And he was able to meet with a doctor, and they discovered a treatment modality that was going to fix that chronic pain. And it did. It worked. And he had never known that was available. And had he not come in, treatments that come out and new modalities. And when you have chronic pain, it is a hopeless place. And I know that deeply. I hear it from my veterans that call the crisis line. And when I talk to them, and my heart goes out to them. And my biggest thing is, keep asking questions, keep pushing for that treatment. There can be some relief and improvement there as well. And enroll, please enroll. So I have some veterans that will say, I don't need the VA, I'm doing fine now. But then 5 years down the road, life happens and things start to hurt worse and that chronic pain kicks in. And it saves a lot of hassle to enroll now than waiting till you have a crisis, too.
We just had Dr. Malsbury on from a company that puts out a device. Now, there's a big problem with the opiates, and that's a separate topic, but they did just donate several $1,000s worth of their units for veterans in Montana for treating chronic pain, and it is an FDA-approved device, so we're going to be doing that in the Institute.
So that's great. See, it's little things like that can provide such hope because, like I said, there are new treatments that come out, and it's always good to keep going and looking at alternatives.
So the big takeaway that I'm hearing from today's show is let's not make a temporary problem a permanent solution. Let's get you enrolled in the VA, because once you're enrolled, my God, we're talking about 30% not growing the suicide problem. Yeah, the VA has some issues, but every large organization does. And I'm sure there's a lot of people, I've met a lot of people in the VA that really do care. So not listening to the media is a huge important step. Would you agree?
I'm sorry. So is your question saying don't listen to the media, you'll feel better?
No, my question is, or my comment is, listening to the media about how the VA is not treating the veterans correctly isn't the way to try to solve your problems. You've got to start actually experiencing the VA because they do have a lot of good things going there.
Yes, I would agree with that. And honestly, our internal surveys of how veterans feel about their care are very positive. And I think the last one I heard last year, I think it was like 80% of veterans really liked the care that they were receiving. But oftentimes we hear about those negative experiences. But I've enjoyed working with my veterans. I know I care for them, and I've seen the excellent care that they've been given, and I've seen the rescues. What's unique to Montana is that we are a rural state. So we have people who live so far from anything that getting mental health services can be very difficult. We also are a frontier state, and we like our hunting and we like our firearms. And so a lot of our veterans are very comfortable with their firearms in rural places. And because of those things and our limited mental health services, we have a greater risk for suicide. And if we can get our veterans engaged in care, giving them hope and things to do, and making sure that their means are safe and that they have loved ones or find a place to be and be connected, it can make the biggest difference. And so another example of why it's important to be enrolled at the VA is sometimes emergencies happen, and I would hate for my veteran to go into emergency care services and have that huge bill. And in some cases, our veterans, because they're enrolled and when that crisis happens, they're able to get some of that covered. Now, that depends on each veteran and their coverage and all of that, but trying to get it covered after the fact can be an added stress that's just not needed. And so I think that's important, too, is we do have this telehealth program that can reach out far through the state, and if we have our veterans enrolled, we can get them connected, and in some cases, quite a bit of free medical service.
Well,
if they're eligible.
One thing that we were very fortunate and very proud of was Wells Fargo just donated a nice-sized grant to the Institute. We're going to be starting up the HEART program. I'll explain that later on with you. But yeah, you're right, access. Access to care is chief among the things that we've really got to hone in on. Mm. Would you agree?
I do agree. And we now offer same-day access. So our mental health clinics are built so that if someone's in crisis and they need to see someone face-to-face, they can come in and they will talk with someone. We also have our Veterans Crisis Line, which is outstanding. Over the last year, they've had less than 0.0-something% of calls that were lost or dropped, which means that 99.9% of calls that are going into the crisis line are getting answered, and they're getting answered quickly, and they're getting help. And this year alone, we've responded to 445 crisis line calls and had 62 rescues in our state. And so it's so critical that our veterans utilize these programs in a rural state. They can call that crisis line anytime, talk to someone, and within a 24-hour window, myself or my counterpart will call them and check in on them again. They can engage in telehealth and meet with a therapist right within their community where their clinic is, their VA clinic is available. And it's across the state. We even have an Indian telehealth services. So our American Indians who want to see a VA provider can go to IHS and meet with a psychiatrist at the VA through their teleprogram. And so it's really, the telehealth services we have are robust. They're highlighted across the nation for how really great they are. And I can't stress enough that it's the same thing as seeing someone face-to-face in just a different way. And I know some of my veterans get a little bit nervous about talking through a camera, but it is effective, and I can't stress the importance of it enough.
Well, thank you very much for appearing this morning. it's really exciting that we do have some things going to help the veterans in Montana, and I'm real happy, and I appreciate your support to the veterans community.
Oh, thank you so much. My dad is a veteran, and he's a Vietnam veteran, Navy, 8 years, and he was really reluctant to engage in care. And when I was hired at the VA and learned all about it, I called him up. He was homeless, living with his sister, and I said, Dad, let me get you connected. And he got connected through the VBA and has a home now. And it meant the world to me that the VA was able to do that for my dad. And my uncle is another Vietnam veteran who saw active combat, and it has impacted his life. And without the VA, I don't know where he'd be, because all of his diabetic treatment, everything he gets is from there. And it has been such a blessing. So I feel a personal connection to the veterans because of how I've been personally connected to veterans in my own life. And so I really hope that your listeners know that I'm sincere and that I really need their help in suicide prevention, in them being there for their buddies, and when they need help, calling that crisis line and reaching out and getting enrolled. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for listening to Veterans Heartbeat. We'd not be able to bring this to you without all the support of the listeners. Thank you again to Farside Signs for sponsoring the show. If you need a unique vehicle design, swing on by and check them out. Also, thank you to our main sponsor, River. The Rural Institute for Veterans Education and Research have an array of services such as veterans-focused education, a vestibular disorder clinic, and now non-pharmaceutical treatments for pain, anxiety, and depression. Check them out on Facebook or on the web at riverofchange.org. Lastly, we'd like to show our appreciation to all of our veterans. Thank you for serving our country and keeping it safe.